Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to this session on technological project management. The context for this session is that I think in deep thought, when our young developers have been working on interesting projects, we've noticed that people are getting stuck on data models, how to develop these data models. Now, in software development, especially when you're building new products, the due diligence which happens before you go into the development is extremely important, right? So learning how to do the due diligence is extremely important. Now let's ask ourselves a question that why is it that we are having a problem? Well, rest of the companies are doing fine. The answer is simple and straightforward, that in a service oriented company, typically what happens is there's a team leader who is very capable of, making a plan, doing the due diligence, doing the data models, doing the wireframes, breaking it down, and so on. And what do the developers do? Follow the instructions as directed, right? With no thought process. And India is known to be the best in the world in terms of producing these A1 quality donkeys, right? So now that's the thing which we'd like to change, where we can get youngsters to start being autonomous with respect to execution, right? That you come into a meeting, you understand what the project objectives are, and you're able to execute the project by yourself with little or no support. Okay. So today, the expectation is hopefully by the end of this 2-hour session today, we would expect you to be able to execute your projects by yourself with little or no support from seniors. And for those who are already in team leader positions, you may be able to guide your team members so they can operate autonomously with little or no support from you. I hope we understand the criticality of this process, because what this process does is this process makes everything top heavy in an organization. Can someone tell me what you understand by top heavy? The idea is to change it from being top heavy to bottom heavy. Yeah, Saurabh, please go ahead.
Yeah, top heavy can be like most of the work is done by the top senior people, and like the thinking and stuff is done by like that's, and always like if some problem arises, the juniors will go to senior. It can top heavy.
Okay. Anyone else?
Everyone is dependent on the one who's at above the hierarchy, and we should rather make it such that the bottom one don't depend on the top one. So instead of top heavy, we must have bottom heavy.
Okay. Does that mean we don't need senior management anymore?
We do, but we must not have the spoon feeding thing.
Okay. The idea is to reduce the dependency, right? Because when it gets too heavy at the top, agility of the organization goes down. The speed at which the organization can do new projects or go forward goes down. So this is very critical, because this is a process which typically people in senior management understand quite well, but people who just start their career may not understand that well. And the objective is in the next 2 hours, we want to make sure that all of us understand it well, and those who are already team leaders, you understand a way of explaining this to the new people who join the team, so they're largely independent. Okay.
What do we mean by agility here?
Ability to change paths, because if you're in a product environment, you do a lot of micro experiments, you gather insights from micro experiments, and you change your course. This is the findings which you get in your micro experiment, right? So that ability to change paths. So agility, if you go by the literal meaning of agility is how you can change your direction without losing speed, right? Dogs are very agile. They can, change direction very quickly without, losing speed. So you put cones, they go around the cones with speed. But if a human has to do that, a human might, slow down after every cone and then change direction. So how do you maintain speed while changing direction? I think you can think of that as agility. So agility can come in if everybody in the team understands how to do this task breakdown and beyond task breakdown, project management at large. But today we are focused on the data models aspect, how you can understand the overall flows. Yeah. So let's, I want to just present an overview for about 2 minutes, and after that we'll take one example. One of you can tell whichever project you're working on, and we can hopefully take 2 or 3 examples today and see how to do this task breakdown. Okay. So now when we are working on any project, so we have this 4 steps of project management which we follow at Deep Thought, right? So if I go with the 4 steps, the first step is the story for alignment, where we write our story of why are we building this project, what do we want to do with this project, right? And there as well, we follow 2 steps. One is micro story and other is macro story. So in micro story, we write down some characters, right? The users who are probably going to use our product, and we talk of what each of the users gain by using that product. And the macro story, we talk about what the product represents and what happens to the product. Okay. Let's take a simple example. Let's say you were building LinkedIn app, right? And you are building the MVP of the LinkedIn app, the most basic version of the LinkedIn app initially, right? So let's say in the most basic version of LinkedIn app, all you have is your recruiters and your job applicants, and they talk to each other, and they may get hired or they may not get hired, right? That's the basic app, let's say you're trying to build. So what would be your micro story? There is John, who's a recruiter, and there is Abdul, who's a job applicant. So then Abdul can go talk to John, Abdul can go talk to Geeta, Abdul can talk to John, Geeta and Sita, who are recruiters, and John can speak to Abdul, Chris and say Larry, 3 applicants. And the Abdul and Larry can speak to each other and understand if there's an alignment between the job opportunity that John has and the kind of job opportunities that Larry is looking forward to, and they can communicate with each other. They may exchange some information about the selection process, and towards the end they can communicate if the person was hired or not. And on the platform, we may want to mention that if Larry got the job through this platform, we want to mention it so that more people get inspired to get onto this platform to get jobs. So this is your micro story, right? Where you're defining who your users are. You're giving some names to the users so you can know your users a little more intimately and understand and sort of get into the lives of your users, right? Now, when it comes to macro story is to enable networking between job applicants and employers, so they could network and headhunt for individuals with the specific capability. So that could be a macro story, right? So macro story is showing the bigger picture of what you're trying to achieve. What does this entire effort represent? That it's a networking application with recruitment as the fundamental objective. That there's one idea of a job portal where people go put jobs and people apply to jobs, but here you're trying to bring a networking context into the job portal so that the recruiters can network with candidates and see which candidate suits them, and the candidates can also network with recruiters and explore if they've got some opportunities around them, rather than a mere job portal where people are putting some jobs and people are applying to jobs. So that's a macro story, right? So I'm bringing a networking context to this entire thing. Now I'd like to ask you guys a question. What gets captured in the macro story which doesn't get captured in the micro story?
In the macro story, the business context, like why it is important.
Okay.
The scale of the project.
Scale, business context, fine. Then
how product create the value. for people.
That also comes in the micro story, right? What is John getting? What is Larry getting? What is Sita getting? It's coming in the micro story also, right? What each one gets.
Maybe you also need to know then what type of data would you take from microstory.
See, business context comes in, the big picture comes in, but apart from that, it may also bring in some theories which are being used by this business to speculate how it's going to add value or how it's going to scale. For example, in this LinkedIn case, the theory is that, you know, beyond a portal context, if you bring a networking context, it can add more value to a recruiter and to an applicant. The theory of networking, right? Why do people do networking? How does networking add value, and so on. So the fundamental philosophies or theories which are at the base of why you're building that application, I think that can come into your macro story. For example, let's say you're writing a macro story for Instagram. You're writing a macro story for Instagram. So there you might say that, you know, we'd like to be the world's best photo sharing UX. We'd like to empower people to tell stories through photographs, and we'd want it to have the best user experience. So we'd like to give the best user experience among all the applications which are existing right now, and help users tell stories, share photographs, and so on. So that could be a macro story. I'm not sure if that's a macro story of Instagram, but that's something which we could come up with. So what are the theories which you see in this macro story?
Can you please repeat the macro story once again?
The macro story is to be the world's best photo sharing UX, where people can tell stories and share photographs through a seamless user experience.
One can be like people wants to share photos, like people wants to talk through photos, communicate through photos. That can be one theory.
Another theory can be that user experience is very important.
Okay. So you can build multiple theories around user experience itself, right? That if you create a great user experience, people might share more stories and people might spend more time on the platform. And when people spend more time on the platform, that's more advertising revenue, right? If it has an advertising model. So when you say great user experience, you might bring in that swipe, you might not put too much of content at once, right? So your features are designed in such a way that there's not much of a cognitive load while performing any of those steps. Now, can you tell me something which comes in a micro story which doesn't come in a macro story?
Can we say the mental model, the exact execution of the task, of the concept? Execution, maybe we can say.
We require flows, like, okay, we'll give these things, like for
So
instance,
not coming in, right? You're just saying this guy gets this, that guy gets this. That's it. You're not talking how.
no, but like by flows, like we'll design flows, no? Like if you have
Flow comes in the next step.
okay.
I think the execution part comes in the micro story and not in the macro story.
I wouldn't say the execution part doesn't come in the micro story. You're just talking of this is what happens. You've not gone into specifics yet.
So can we call it a mental model then?
How is it a mental model? It's just telling you that this guy gets this guy gets this. Your macro story also tells it. So I can say that, you know, it gives you the best photo sharing user experience. But the micro story can be Saurav would be able to seamlessly share his photographs, and his friend Umang will be able to read that, and they both can stay connected and they can keep sharing stories. Aiden, whenever he's bored, he can open this application, read a lot of stories shared by different people, and feel more positive.
So value creation.
That's coming in the macro story also. Micro story is easier to visualize because there are real characters. You've given some names to the characters. You've created some personas around the characters. Micro story is easier to visualize, while macro story shows you the bigger picture. While writing your macro story, you may get ideas to improve your micro story. While writing your micro story, you may get ideas to improve the macro story.
Okay, and what would be the difference between macro story and product philosophy?
The product philosophy comes into the macro story, but your macro story doesn't go into depth of the product philosophy, right? It just gives a over. If you can say your macro story is kind of like a preamble of your product philosophy.
Okay, and can we say that macro story is an example of macro story? Like macro story is a concept, and it's an example of that concept.
You could think of it that way. Yeah. That's one way you could think of it. See, this is just a framework we have come up with, so it helps us, internalize the product which we're trying to build before going into execution. Because when we internalize the vision, the execution becomes very smooth. A lot of times, what we tend to do is in a hurry, we don't internalize it and we dive into the project, and at every point we get stuck because we do not know where we're headed. But once we internalize, it hardly takes about 30-40 minutes to put these pieces together. But once we put these pieces together, we get a sense of what we're trying to do. And let's say some product researcher or somebody else has come up with the idea and you're taking the project forward. When you assemble the micro story and macro story, you may run into some gaps in the story. So you might go and clarify with the person when you run into those gaps. You might go and clarify when you run into gaps with the person. So that's nice, right? Let's understand one thing, right? Every time when you go and write in certain formats, right? When you write something in rigorous formats, it builds that conceptual clarity. That is why if you look at it, the academia has so many formats for writing. Research paper, white paper, case study. There's so many formats which exist because when you write in a certain format, it builds a certain kind of conceptual clarity within it. Does that make sense? So if someone is giving you a project brief, and you're able to, write down the micro story and macro story of it. If there are gaps in comprehension, you might be able to ask those gaps, because generally when we listen, we feel we got it. But when you start writing, if there are gaps, they become evident. Does this make sense? So if you can spend the 30-40 minutes in writing this story for alignment, your mind meditates with the project. So there's less anxiety and more joy in moving into the project. Do I make sense? Less anxiety and more of joy moving into the project. So this is why we do this step of micro story and macro story. And whatever I told you, I think all these things will make sense once you start writing some micro story and macro story, right? So I see Shagun nodding with a lot of conviction that yes, this is true, because she's written a lot of micro stories and macro stories. And so she has an experiential feel of the value of it. Whatever I told you right now, it may not strike you immediately, but if you followed this step, you'll get that experiential feel of how this step makes it easier for you. Do I make sense? Right. Next is, so first step is story for alignment. So the tool is story and the objective is alignment, right? So we are aligned with the project. The second step in the DT framework, project framework, is scope for agility. So when we build a 0-to-1 innovation project, such a project does not exist anywhere in the world. It's not a copy-paste job. So when it's not a copy-paste job, it can become mentally very overwhelming for us to do the whole thing because we have no clue where to start. Is that relatable? We have no idea where to start, right? I mean, we're making first of its kind, but we just don't know how it looks like. So that's where Eric Ries's lean philosophy becomes important. I would encourage all of you to go through this 2 hours video of Eric Ries's lean philosophy. I took a workshop on lean philosophy, I think a couple of months back. That's available on our YouTube channel. So you can go through lean philosophy of Eric Ries. There are enough videos of Eric Ries also where he explains lean startup methodology. There's a book called Lean Startup written by Eric Ries, which I explained in the 2-hour-long workshop with examples like this. So in the lean philosophy, what we do is we make a small version, right? The smallest possible version of the product. Try to get some users to use it, gain confidence, and go to the next version. Because if we try to boil the ocean, we may go nowhere. we get stuck forever. We get stuck forever if we try to do too many things. So we try to, narrow down to the most basic thing which we'd like to, do. So in step 2, what we do is we write down what is it that we'd like to establish at an MVP level. What is it that we'd like to establish at an MVP level? And here they may want to, define our screens, right? Like screens in terms of wireframes, right? Like what all wireframes do we have here? Do I have 3 screens, 4 screens? I may not go into specific details, but we can talk of in that screen what all elements do I want. Just an overview. Just an overview that, okay, I've got 3 screens. Like in the case of LinkedIn, we might say, okay, I have one screen where the applicant can apply to jobs, one screen where a job details are shown, and one screen where results are shown or something like that. For recruiter, one screen to post a job, one screen to view all jobs, one screen to interact with candidates. That way, you might list what all screens you want with just a broad summary of what goes into the screen without going into details. Then here, we might also want to think about what all data do we want to store under each screen? What all data does each screen, want to store? So what data do we store? What screens do we have? And what are the communication flows? So now if I know the databases which I'm using, every screen is interacting with the databases, right? So can I draw a diagram and understand which screen is moving to which screen and which screen is talking to which database? Let's take a simple example of the recruiter thing, right? So there's a screen where the candidate logs in. Then the candidate sees multiple jobs on that screen. Then there's a detailed screen where the candidate sees one particular job, the candidate applies. Then there's a result screen where the candidate can see results of all the jobs the candidate has applied in. So 3 screens from the candidate side. From the recruiter side, there's one screen where the recruiter can see all the jobs that the recruiter has posted, one screen where the recruiter can post a job, one screen where the recruiter can view all the results, and one screen where the recruiter can declare results. Say 4 screens on the recruiter side, 3 screens on the applicant side, 7 screens. Now, I want a database which stores all the jobs which are there on the platform. Now, if I draw a diagram and see, here there is a screen where the candidate can view all jobs. And there's a screen where the candidate can create a job, where the recruiter can create a job. Now, both of them are talking to one database, right? I'm storing the data of jobs. All the jobs in my platform. So when they create, I want this to add a job to this database. And here I want to view all the elements of this database. And here if you look at it, view jobs, detailed job. On clicking a button, I would want to go into this screen. And on clicking back, maybe I want to go back to the screen. And maybe there's results section. I'd want to move between these 2 screens. And here maybe I have all applications database where people have applied. So whenever the candidate applies through the detailed job, I talk to my applicants database. And maybe my results can also come from applications database. And view applicant screen when the recruiter sees who all applied. Maybe this database talks to that. I'm just giving a crude example, but I hope you guys get this example, right? I have certain screens. I know which screen is moving to which screen. Say there's a My Jobs screen where the recruiter can see all the jobs. From the My Jobs, the recruiter can go to create jobs. From the My Jobs, the recruiter can go to view applications and come back. Yeah, Pooja?
Most of the time, all the CRUD operations are related to like attached with backend most of the time. So don't you think first rectifying CRUD operations out and then going into other functionalities we can look at?
I think when you do this process flow only, you will need you will understand the CRUD operations. While doing this flow itself, you are seeing the CRUD operations, no?
Yeah, means first let's decide the screens. From the screens, we bring out all the data model to do
We
CRUD
will decide the screens and the databases.
Yeah.
What data do I want to store?
But first decide the screen so that we can divide the databases also.
Absolutely. When you have the screens, you get a sense of what data would I need. But I wouldn't limit my thought process of databases to screens. I hope you're paying attention to this. I wouldn't limit my thought process of databases to screens. Because I would also look at my macro story. And from my macro story, I start analyzing what all data do I need to be successful in meeting these business objectives. Do you guys get what I just said? I look at my macro story. My macro story is I want to enable networking. If I want to enable networking, what data do I need to enable smart networking? Would I need data of the psychology of these people so that I can enable them to connect like-minded people? Your screen may not be capturing information of psychology. So then your backend is telling you, please create a screen for psychographics and give me. So Shagun agreed. Most of the times we get the databases from the screens, but at times it is possible that the macro story tells us that we need this data, and from that data we arrive at a screen.
Like macro story will tell us when that is going, when job would be available. So key values that we need to store in the databases that will came from the macro story.
No, I mean, that's not what I'm saying, Shagun. So what I'm saying is, macro story tells our business objectives, right? What do we want to achieve? What is that innovation we are bringing? What is that amazing, beautiful thing we're bringing to this world? What is that power we are giving to the users? So what is LinkedIn saying? Hey, Naukri, Monster, all these fellows already exist, but they're just portals. Here I'm giving the power of networking. Then as a backend developer, I ask, if I want to give the power of networking, what data would I want to have? What data would give me that power? Then I ask, if Shagun is an extrovertish person, maybe Tushar, who's a recruiter, wants to talk to Shagun. So do I know if Shagun is an introvert or extrovert? If Shagun is a patient person, then maybe recruiter Umang wants to talk to Shagun. But do I know if Shagun is patient or not? Do I know if Umang wants to talk to patient people? How do I know the psychographic preferences of Umang? And how do I know the psychographic profile of Shagun? Backend is asking this question. Then backend knows I can't get the data. It tells frontend, give me the data. So if you want me to bring that intelligence into the system, I need the data. What backend thinks is, I want to build a certain intelligence in my system. If I want that intelligence, I need that ability to make those decisions. For those decisions, I may need some data and metrics. But that metrics again need data. So what data do I want to collect? We can ask these questions from the macro story. Do I make sense now?
Yes.
So I would not look at a flowchart model. I would look at a flywheel model. Flywheel model is your story is helping you figure out your screens better. Your screens might help you improve your story. Your story helps you improve your description of databases. Your databases could improve your description of your screens. Okay, let me ask you guys a very different question. You're playing cricket. Can a batsman improve the bowler's bowling, or can a bowler improve the batsman's batting in the team?
Both can improve each other.
How?
Like if I bowl well, then the batsman performs. And if I start bowling well, batsman needs to improve. If batsman improves, then I'll also need to improve.
That is fine, but more than that, see, if I'm a bowler and I see your batting, I can give you very high quality advice because I know how other bowlers would think about your batting.
Yeah.
I would say, okay, the gap between your legs is too high. So you'll not have flexibility in your movement. So if I'm a bowler, I'll bowl the ball away from your body and swing and take it out. So I induce an edge and get you out. If I'm a bowler, this is what I would think. So maybe, adjust your distance between your legs based on the bowler. Or if you've decided that you want more distance between the legs like Virender Sehwag, don't poke the ball which is going far away from you. So as a bowler, I can give this advice to you. Now, as a batsman, I can tell you, hey, you're very predictable with your bowling. You're bowling the ball in the same area all the time. You may want to mix it up a bit because as a batsman, it doesn't take me much time to predict when you're going to bowl what. And if I have that prior knowledge, I can play very well. You see why I brought this analogy, right? So as a back-end developer, I can bring clarity to the front-end developer. As a front-end developer, I can bring clarity to the back-end developer. What do I mean by that? As a front-end developer, I think in terms of user experience, correct? So I ask to give this user experience, what kind of data would I need or what kind of APIs would I need? What kind of knowledge do I want to be coming in from the backend? Last time we understood the difference between front-end and backend in the computer science basics session. The front-end is focusing on user experience. So through user experience, the front-end folks might be able to tell, hey, can we figure out this data? The backend is looking at that intelligence, right, which you're trying to bring, that business intelligence you're trying to bring. So the backend from that business intelligence point of view might give some suggestions to front-end, maybe you guys can create this user experience. So I would not believe that, my backend comes from my wireframe. I would believe that my wireframe can also benefit from the backend which I would create. And as a practice activity, I would encourage all the backend developers to think of the databases without even looking at wireframes. Without even looking at the wireframes, ask yourself, what kind of databases would I need for this? This is the functionality I'm trying to support. The wireframes may come in any manner, but what kind of data would I want to look at? Then when the wireframes get ready, you can always go and fine-tune your databases through that, right? Because then your databases would be unbiased, right? Say Shagun is a back-end developer and Pooja is a front-end developer. Now Shagun goes and makes a list of her own databases. This is her understanding of the project. Pooja makes wireframes. This is her understanding of the project. Now, what if Shagun has thought of a new database which Pooja didn't even think of? Pooja might add to her wireframes. What if Pooja was able to think of a user experience which involves usage of certain data which Shagun was not able to think of? That augments Shagun's thinking, right? So if both of them work independently, build something, and then meet and start discussing, they might augment each other's thought process, right? Do I make sense? So what do we look at? We look at wireframes on one end, but not detailed, right? Just blocks. I have this, and so on. And then we also look at databases. Again, not details, rough. This has application data. What do I have in the application? I'll deal with it later. So Abhishek, to give you a perspective of this, to put it in a simple way, it's like we are designing a house, okay? So when we're designing a house, I just give myself a plan that I need a kitchen, I need a hall, I need a bedroom, I need 2 bathrooms, and maybe I need 1 study room. And maybe I tell myself that I want a very big hall because I want the family to meet and, have a lot of social activities. And maybe I tell myself that my bedroom will be small because I do not spend much time in my bedroom. I'd want my study room to have proper lighting because I spend a lot of time in my study room. And ventilation as well. Maybe I'd want to define how I want my ventilation to be and so on. But I don't go into specifics of what I put inside my hall or kitchen or anything. So first I commit to what all rooms I want, which room would be bigger, which room would be smaller, what are the requirements I'd want from each room and so on. Then I make a rough outline. I draw blocks. This is my kitchen. So something like this, right? I take my house and I say, okay, this is my gate. Sorry. This is my entire compound. This is my house. I've got some trees here. Say I've got a well here. and I've got a gate here. Here, let's say I want my living room. Here, let's say I want a big hall. Here, let's say I want here I want a bathroom. Here, let's say I want another bathroom. Here I have my kitchen, and this place is left free or something like that, right? I come up with my rooms, right? Hall, kitchen, bathroom, and say study room. I come up with some plan. Then somebody might say, hey, study room is at the entrance, I'll get more disturbance. So then you might want to put study room somewhere else. But then your hall is getting disturbed, you might want to put a hall like this instead, horizontal. So you start figuring out the outline. Then now when you have the outline, you start looking at in the hall, what all do I put? Do I put a TV here? Do I put, where do I put the AC? Where do I put different things? I can start going into those details. Why do we commit to the outline before going into details of where to place what?
Because you can get the overview right first.
And why would you want to do that?
Because after we get into the details, you may get confused and it will be also difficult to like reconfigure. If you don't
Forever
get
you'll
the
be
outline.
reconfiguring.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Because when we don't commit to a structure, we, that iteration becomes like forever, never ending. So we commit to the macro structure, then we move into the micro level detail filling. Does that heuristic make sense? It's like a heuristic. First, let me commit to the outline. Once I commit to the outline, then I'll start injecting details into the outline. It's like, let's say I want to write a 5-page newsletter. I first think of what do I want on page number 1? What do I want on page number 2? What do I want on page number 3? This is how you would write your English letters, right? In school, you have to, you want 4 paragraphs. You decide what do you want in each paragraph. And after deciding the structure of each paragraph, you inject details into each paragraph, right? So with the project as well, that's what we're doing. Initially, we're writing the story. We're getting a sense of what we wish to achieve. Then in stage 2, what we're doing is we're creating a macro level structure. But while defining a macro level structure, we're looking at what are the things we want to do right now and what are the things we want to do later. Because if we try to take too many things, we may never execute the project. Do I make sense? When you're looking at the macro details itself, it's easy to restrict, right? For example, your LinkedIn. Let's say you want to show which other jobs you, let's say you want to go into a lot more details of hobbies of this person. You want to give friend requests between people and all. In the MVP stage, you say, okay, I'm not going to put friend requests because that's unnecessary, complexity for now. In phase 2, I'll maybe look at it. Although that's an important feature, you might say that's not the critical one. The critical part, the critical business case here is the person being able to apply to a job and being able to see the result of the job. Again, let's say somebody comes up with an idea that I'll give quizzes so that people can conduct quizzes and test the quality of the person. You might say in the MVP phase, I will not give quizzes. If required, I'll use Google Forms and conduct the quizzes. In later phase, I'll give quizzes because my core is only to make this guy apply and see the result. You understand why we are getting into that analysis, right? Because if you ask what is important, everything in the world is important. You'll want to start a second Google. You'll want to build another tech empire. But you may not have the resources at the MVP phase, right? So we cut down and we ask what is critical to my business case. So in the MVP stage, I only do what is critical. And once the MVP is executed, I can always add the things, step by step. So in stage 2, okay. Stage 2, Shagun is saying something. So stage 2, we look at wireframes, we look at the databases, and we look at the flows, right? From one screen to one screen, what is a flow? And from database to screen, what is a flow? So Pooja, your CRUD comes in these flows only. Database to screen interaction, your CRUD comes in.
We also need to understand in phase 1 itself that okay, these changes might be possible. These changes will be making these changes in future. So we need to make structure for that. So can we consider that in phase 1, or we'll consider that later?
If you ask me, for a beginner, I would suggest don't worry about it. As a beginner, I would suggest don't worry about it. But as you gain more experience, maybe we can have a more advanced workshop on project management, where you start bringing in that foresight into your structures. But for a beginner, I wouldn't teach foresight. I would want the beginner to practice this, get confidence with this. Then after 1 month of practicing this, second month, I'm happy to teach you guys how you can bring in foresight. But if your macro story is very strong, then that foresight wouldn't be too tough. Foresight, right? Me being able to foresee what might come later. Yeah, Utkarsh?
Can you please go over that summarization of the stage 2 once again, the 3 things which we do?
One is the screens, right? What screens do I have? Not in detail, but just an overview. Databases, again, not in detail, but just an overview. What data would I want to collect? And the flows. Which database talks to which screen and how does it talk? So the screen may want so what Pooja was calling as CRUD is, I'm able to create a new entry in the database. I'm able to read an entry out of the database. I may be able to update an entry in the database, or I may be able to delete an entry in the database. For example, jobs, right? I'm a recruiter. I may want to delete a job. I may want to create a job. I may want to read a job. I may also want to update a job. But if I'm an applicant, would you want to give the applicant the power to create a job? No. Would you want to give the applicant a power to read a job? Depending on the status. If it is published. If the recruiter has said, okay, put it in public domain. And would you want to give the power to the applicant to update a job? No. Would you want to give the applicant the power to delete a job? So your create, update, and delete are 3 permissions you're giving only to that recruiter who's posted the job. Everyone else, you're only giving the read permission. So this comes when you start seeing the flows. The screen to database interaction. But again, when you build all your databases itself, yeah, it's very difficult to think of your APIs without the screens. You'll need the screens to think of your APIs. Because, the concept of API comes when there's a client to server communication, right? So when you don't have a client end, how will you? Or as a backend developer, what you can do is define your databases and define what are the portals which will be used on the front end. There's one portal where the client, there's one portal where the applicant applies. There's one portal used by the recruiter. So when you define it as a portal, you don't go into details of how it looks like. You just say, hey, this exists. You only question, okay, I have this data. Where is this data coming from? You say, okay, it comes from applicant portal. Where is this data coming from? It's coming from recruiter portal. So where do I send this data? Where do I get this data from? Backend developer can do that analysis. What are the portals which come in? What are the databases and what are the flows between the portal and the database? But definitely a screen is more detailed than a portal, right? Portal as in, okay, applicant has some magic phone, that guy taps something, it happens. But when you say a screen, there's more specificity to what happens. Do you guys get what I just said? If I'm a backend developer, I say Shagun is the applicant, Tushar is the recruiter. Shagun has one portal, and through that portal, she will give me this data, I'll store it. Tushar has one portal, to that portal, I'll send this data, he will see it. What is in the portal, I don't know. That front-end fellow will take care. That can be a backend developer's thought process, right? There's a portal for this user, there's a portal for this user, this data goes there, this data comes here, and so on. But when the front end and the back end sit together, they can fine tune it. Because the back end guy is probably just looking at it as a portal, while the front end person is looking at it like a screen, a little more in detail. A front-end person may be looking at it only as, okay, this data exists. But the back-end person may be going a little more into detail of how the database exists, right? The front-end person has certain perspective of the back-end, but the front-end person's perspective of back-end is usually lesser. Likewise, the back-end person also has a certain perspective of the front-end, but the perspective could be lesser. Am I making sense? So in stage 1, we try to achieve alignment. Stage 2, we're trying to achieve agility, where we start something small and get going. So we're only putting the outline. So in the outline, we're looking at our screens, we're looking at our databases, and we're looking at our flows. When we're talking of flows, there are two kinds of flows: screen to screen flows, screen to database flows. Right? Now, when we move to stage 3, here, so stage 1 was story for alignment, stage 2 was scope for agility, stage 3 is specific accountables. Now, in stage 2, I got the macro level flow. Stage 2, I got the macro level flow. But do I know what to do? There's a problem. And that's what Abhishek was telling me yesterday. That sometimes the big picture seems okay. But when we are going into work is when we have problem. That's when your stage 3 comes in. Your big picture is really, really clear. Why is your big picture really, really clear? It's like, you know what your kitchen is. You know what your bedroom is. You know what your bathroom is. You know what your living room is. Now you're trying to inject details into each of them. So you ask, in my screen, what all things come in? And you can, and deep thought, we have a practice of creating an extended wireframe. What's an extended wireframe? It's almost like a mock-up. It's not as neat as a UI, but it's almost like a real page. Do you guys get what's an extended wireframe? It's almost like the real page which you can put it out there. We make it on Google Sheets so that we can make it very fast. So you wouldn't put lorem ipsum content, you'd put real content. Like I'll give you an example of an extended wireframe right now. Let's say I'm making an extended wireframe of an applicant. So I make an extended wireframe, I put an actual picture of, say, a person, and I write the name. And I write names, let's say senior dev at Apple. He's applied to this job, he's applied to TPM at Tesla. I start writing this way and I put real examples for everything. If I'm saying a picture has to come there, I take one mock picture and put it there. So it's like a detailed mock-up, extended wireframe. So one thing is we build on our wireframe and we make it a detailed mock-up, and we build on a database and we make data models, right? So in this database, what all entries do I want? In this database, what all entries do I want? So when we think of our data models, there are, I think, two areas to think about, right? One is, what all data does my front end need? What all data do I supply to my front end? So this mockup needs me to give all this data. So I need the data in my database. This mockup is giving me all this data to store. So I may have to store all of it. Like this screen is saying, this is Shagun's phone number, this is her gender, this is her name, this is her father's name, this is her date of birth. So your screen is giving me all those details. So I put that in my data model because I know that I may want to store all that data. I'm getting it. I may want to store it in my database. From that, I understand, okay, that these are the things I add to my data model. That is one way of thinking about it. Another way, important aspect of thinking here is, my APIs would demand that I get this entry out of a database. So I'm going to do some querying, right? Please give me all the psychology jobs that Tushar applied to in the last 6 months. So when I'm asked that question, I would want to immediately pull out all those applications and give the data to the front end. So which means when I'm searching applications, I may want to search the application with the help of the date when he applied, the genre of that job, and the fact that it is an application of Tushar. So for every application entry which I store in the database, I may want to remember who applied, which recruiter posted the job, which company posted that job. We're not running a query. I know that in the future I will run all these queries. So to execute those queries properly, what do I want the database element to remember so that my queries become easy? So if your application was storing name of the recruiter, name of the applicant, name of the company, the domain of the job and the subdomain of the job, the date when the job was posted, the date when the person applied to the job, the final status of this application, was he selected, rejected, or no status declared, and when was that status updated? Yeah, Utkarsh.
I'm confused between the two ways of thinking. Like, to me, it's sounding the same. Like, how are they two different?
Which one?
Yeah, the first way you said, the two ways of thinking about data models. Like, I'm not able to distinguish between the two ways.
There are two steps to me. Rather than ways, I'll call it two steps. First step is I look at my front end, what data is it giving me? So I put all those entries into my database because my data model contains all those, because I'll have to store all that. The second thing is, currently what all data does my front end demand? So if my front end demands this data and I have to fetch it out of my database and supply it to it, what kind of queries would I have to run for those data? Now, what if somebody says, please show me all the jobs whose status was updated in the month of July? What if I don't have the data available? Then what do? I query all the jobs posted in the last 1 year. Then in that I query the application. I have to get the data from so many sources and then construct my query together. Okay, let me give an easier example, right? Let's say I'm Amazon and Utkarsh is my customer and Umang is my seller. And Utkarsh has purchased some products. Now, let us say I have one database where I store products and I have another database where I store the sales. Or I store lots. I store lots of products. No, one lot. Umang has listed one lot of biscuits. And when I list that lot, I list the expiry date. And another database where I store the purchases. That Utkarsh has purchased these biscuits of this batch at this much price and he paid, and through this bank account and through this he has paid. Now, what if I don't store the expiry date in Utkarsh's database? Then if someone asks me, please give me the data of all expired products that Utkarsh purchased, or all the products that Utkarsh purchased which may have expired as of today, then what do? I have to run one query where I get the data of what all products Utkarsh purchased. Then I have to run separate queries for this product. What is the expiry date? Has it expired? For this product, what is, are you guys getting it? One, I run a query ki what all products did Utkarsh purchase? Biscuits, shampoo, chocolates, 3 things he purchased. Now I supply these and run one more query where I ask, this batch number chocolate, what was the expiry date? This batch number biscuit, what is the expiry date? This batch number shampoo, what was the expiry date? If that expiry date is after today, not expired. If that expiry date is before today, expired. So I run 2 queries and then declare how many expired products Utkarsh may be having today. But if I know that I'm going to run this query multiple times, I might want to store the expiry date in the transaction of Utkarsh itself. So I don't have to run 2 queries, and with one query itself, I get it done. Are you getting the thought process? I would appreciate if you guys ask questions, because I think this is the core concept of today's workshop. If people are needing to go to Hariharan again and again for data models, this is where they're getting stuck. Am I right, Shagun? Because the first part is not, 4th class kid will also write. Seeing the wireframe, what all do I want in my data model? This is where people are getting stuck.
Yeah, means they got stuck and we got stuck at the point where we could bring the query and how we could, like, if a project is there, status is there, what is the status flow of the project? Either it's a published draft, and how we bring all the status and all the queries from the data model.
So Shagun, it's very simple, right? You ask which all APIs talk to this database. See, it's like let's say I'm a go down and I know that Utkarsh comes to me every week and Utkarsh says eco-friendly, no plastic, give me paper bag. Okay, Umang comes. Umang says paper is eco-friendly. What hypocrite are you? And he says, okay, give me in cotton bag. I know Utkarsh only accepts paper bag. I know Umang accepts only cotton bag. Saurav is like, no, I come from Gujarat. Give me only plastic bag. I want to save my cost. No offense. Okay. Let's say 3 of them come and 3 of them have their own preference. I'm a go down. And I have to supply to people. And Anaka is a very nice person. She comes with her bag. I don't have to give her a bag. Okay. These 4 come to me regularly. Now I'm a go down. I need to supply to these people. I know Saurav comes only once a month. So what do? I make sure that once a month when Saurav is coming, those many plastic bags are there with me. Whenever Utkarsh is coming, I make sure those many paper bags are with me. Whenever Umang is coming, those many cotton bags are with me. And I know Utkarsh always buys biscuits. So that time when Utkarsh is coming, I make sure that some worker has segregated those biscuits and kept it ready. So I know that someone is going to take, inventory from me. When I know someone is taking inventory from me, I want to be a little prepared so that my life is easier, right?
Again,
See,
but
do you get more time to prepare after the customer comes to your shop or before the customer comes to your shop?
Before the customer.
So if it is Diwali and you're a cracker seller, do you have no work 1 month before Diwali? You have a lot of work because after the customers come to your shop, you can do nothing. You're segregating everything and you're preparing for the season before Diwali. So when the season actually starts, you're fully prepared so you sell as quickly as possible. Let me give a simple example. Let's say you're a curry point. A lot of people are coming and buying your curries. Most people, they'll pack the curry then and there and give. But you're a smart fellow, what do?
You already keep the curry packets ready. You keep the packed ones ready.
Exactly. So when they come, immediately you sell. And you're an even more smart fellow, during season demand will be very high. You run offers and say that if you buy these many coupons from me, I'll give you 5% discount. And they get coupon cards. You take the coupon card from them, immediately give them the packet. What you're doing is, because you're clearing your queue very quickly, in that same 1 hour of business, you're selling more. So all of this smartness, why are you bringing that smartness? Because you know that when the real business happens, you want to be very quick. What will happen when you're slow when the real business happens? The customers get angry and
Not wait for the service.
and they go away. So your APIs as well, you want your application to be very responsive. So if your APIs are very delayed, that is if your querying is not done in an efficient way and your APIs are getting delayed, that can be problematic. So you optimize your database so that querying can be done faster. How I'm coming to that, but I hope you understand the intention, right? I want my warehouse to be so nicely organized so that when someone comes to ask me something, I immediately take and give it. Why do I want to give it immediately?
again, to make the customer happy.
Huh?
Again, to make the customer happy.
Exactly. I want to give good service.
Then that is that it apply again. It comes back to the lean philosophy, right? That you might not know in the first phase that what are the things that customer require. You'll get that data in the first phase, then you reiterate in the second phase.
In the second phase, you might optimize things a bit.
Yeah, as you said, the curry seller might not understand that people require it in packed it. But when he understands, then he start doing it. right?
And it's perfectly okay to improve iteratively. We might be able to foresee a few things, we might not be able to foresee a few things.
Yeah.
You asked what is foresight, right, Tushar? This is foresight, right? Like the curry point person being able to foresee that there'll be huge rush. Like when we were in kids fair last year, I know that on Christmas Day, the crowd will be very high. So I prepared the team beforehand with the processes to handle a huge crowd. But the many stores who set up their stalls, they didn't know that the crowd will be very high on that day because they didn't have that foresight. They didn't attend kids fair earlier. I was like in my 6th kids fair. No, very regular stall vendor in kids fair. So I told them, you know, your tables, people will even throw your tables down, utna crowd aayega. And on that day when crowd came in, the guy was like, yeah, you're right. I said, see, today your table has come out of your stall, right? Why has it come out of your stall? Crowd is not coming. You're putting it out so that you can catch the crowd easily. I said on Christmas Day, your table will go inside the stall because, you know, your crowd will be pushing it in to make sure your things don't get stolen. You're going to move the table into the stall. Today, your table is out of the stall. Tomorrow, your table would come into the stall. This is foresight. Being able to see how your process may have to be optimized. That foresight, it takes certain experience to learn. I wouldn't encourage you to learn it right now. But as you keep mastering project management, eventually you can learn that foresight. Yeah, Tushar, go ahead with your question.
So let's say that you foresaw a certain demand and you made changes based on those demands. But later on, you realize that there was no such demand during the actual phase. Then what do you do? Does it come under the lean management where next time you make improvement? But if so, then right now you have had some losses, right? Then how do you cope with those?
That's a very good question, Tushar. So there's a simple concept, right? If you think from it from a lens of public policy, in public policy, right? Let's say you're the government, not public policy exactly, but governance. Let's say you're the government. There's a lot of traffic jam and so on. So you create over bridges, flyovers, and all of that. You create infrastructure. But what if you realize that an infrastructure is not in use? You liquidate that thing, right? I mean, you remove that infrastructure. You try to destroy it and recycle it and use it in some other way.
But that would require more cost again, right? What if you make people use that bridge?
You would do, before removing that bridge, you would want to do the cost benefit analysis. What's the cost of removing the bridge and what's the benefit you get by removing the bridge? So if the cost is X and I get a benefit by recycling it in some other way and I get a real benefit, I might want to do it. But if the cost is too high, I might just leave it alone. But if the benefit is that, you know, traffic gets better because it's not being used and that space can be used for something else, that material can be used for something else maybe, then you might want to do it. You might want to do the, so it's basically the stage of infrastructure and de-infrastructure. Why do you create infrastructure? Because so many people are using the same thing. So many people are using the same thing, you create infrastructure because the infrastructure can then optimize it for everyone at a scale. So many people are doing the same thing, you create a factory so that everyone does it efficiently. But that's not being used, you de-infrastructure, right? Because then those resources can be put to some other use.
And all of it boils down to poor decision making in the initial phase. Because if you had planned properly, had foreseen properly, then the problem wouldn't have occurred.
Exactly. That's why, see, if you're trying to build scalable applications, foresight is definitely important. Foresight is definitely important. But again, I would say first learn basics of project management. Once you're very clear with these basics, then I think I'm happy to take a workshop on foresight later once you get this. Foresight is definitely important, but I wouldn't want to jump the gun. Do I make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Now coming back. So what did we say? That we want to respond very quickly, right? So yeah, Pooja, go ahead.
So let's say for a MVP, I am performing like some kind of CRUD operations for my MVP, and in second operation, I want to involve the operation that you said, like fetching internal querying I want to do. So in that case, for my first milestone, I am preparing a project like that. It is intact and it is very proper. But while I am moving to my second stage, achieving my second milestone, I have to make a lot of changes in order to achieve my second milestone. So, like that particular phase going from 1 to 2, don't you think that will be a little time consuming, and how we can predict it
Again, I don't want to get into that right now, because that is basically, your design systems, right? How you design that system.
Okay.
Foresight and, systems level design stuff. I don't know the jargon, what you call it, but for me, it's like how you design the overall system and how you make that system very robust. That's a different discussion altogether. So the scope of today's workshop is only how to execute MVPs.
Okay.
Right. So, but if you're looking at beyond MVP, I think all these concepts change. And I'm happy to do another workshop on this, maybe next Sunday or next Sunday, where we pick something like our live classroom, which is already very big, and then start looking at how do I structure it properly so I can visualize the whole system and bring in maybe systems thinking and so on to be able to handle those problems. But to be honest, if you're able to practice this really well, learning that becomes easier. Because today what I'm seeing is people are only operating at the micro level. People are not seeing the macro level. Modular thinking, right? Can I see this as modules? What's inside the module is a black box to me. But I know I have 4 modules and those 4 modules interact with each other this way. If you're able to see that, okay, India is a large country, I don't care. There's North India, Central India, West India, East India, South India. That's it. If I'm able to visualize it that way, then I say, okay, I go into South India, there are 5 states in South India. I go into Telangana, there are, these many 10 old districts and new districts, these many are there. I go into Rangareddy district, in Rangareddy district, these many mandals are there. So I see at a micro and macro level, then I'm comfortable with whatever is going on there, right? So I think the ability to think at a systems level and visualize the system becomes easier if you're able to see that flow diagram, what we drew in stage 2. Because all you're trying to do is you're trying to understand what are my parts, what are the interactions between my parts, what are the interactions which are necessary, what are the interactions which are not necessary. And sometimes you might want to say, these two fellows are interacting too frequently. So can I take a piece of this fellow and store him here itself to make it faster? You ask, can I reorganize the blocks? Why do I reorganize the blocks? Because the communication becomes easier, right? It's like saying that my product research team and my tech team are talking too frequently. Communication gaps are coming on. Can I introduce one common team which sits in both the teams so that that problem can be solved? That's again systems level thinking, right? These two systems need to interact. Can I put one link in between so that that interaction can become efficient? So this kind of thought process can become easier when you're able to see the bird's eye view clear. We will do that maybe 2 weeks from today, once you guys practice this enough, because I want people to practice this properly before I teach them, because that will not be understood until someone practices this properly. Because design systems is a part of our backend curriculum we are developing, stage 3. What I'm doing right now is possibly stage 1 or stage 1 of our backend curriculum. Clear, people? So now let's go back to our data models. So now you forecast what kind of queries might operate on the database. What kind of queries might operate on the database? So when I know what kind of query operates in the database, I add all those keys into the database or into each document in the database. It's like, let's say Mohit is applied to certain jobs. Now each job application of Mohit is a document in a database. Now I know a query which can come is, whom all did to what all jobs did Utkarsh recommend people? So if I know that this query might come into that applicant database, I might want the document itself to have the recommender's name. Or let us say you have another database which is Abhishek's database, which is the recruiter's database, which is the result. Now you might build a data model where you say application number and status. That's it. That's also good enough, no? You store the application number and status. So if you want to process it, what do you do? From that application number, you go to the application, you go to the job application. and you take the status and you view it there. But now if you ask, how many successful referrals did Utkarsh have? Then what do? You run a query of how many applicants did Utkarsh recommend? And then you run a query with this database key, how many of those applications were successful? And after running 2 queries, you get a count of how many Utkarsh recommendations were successful. So a simple way of thinking through this is to think of what are the queries which will get used, and for that query, what keys will be given. So I add those keys into my database, my job is done. I mean, into the document. Am I clear? Now, one more thing is when you think of your data model, there are times when in your data model, you are having all the entries, and there are times when you don't have all the entries, right? So if I'm not wrong, I think when you define your schema, you're defining all the entries in your document, right? But when you make your data model, sometimes you don't need your entire schema. When you're making your, for your API, because sometimes your API may not be grabbing all the data of your database, right? It may be grabbing only certain elements. You may want to have that also listed down somewhere. Do you guys get what I just said? Your database, let's say, has the person's date of birth, the person's gender, the person's address, the person's father's name, the person's Aadhaar number, and so on. But you know that when your front-end screen is running a query, it only wants the name of the person and the date of birth. So if this is happening, if only name of the person and date of birth are the only things which are required, you may want to incorporate that information somewhere that, hey, I need to get these 2 information for this API. This is the only data I need for this API. So that when you write your API, it becomes very clear, right? That my API will be grabbing this information and presenting this information to the front end. Because one mistake, exactly. Your schema is the structure for the entire document, right? But in my API, I may not need your entire schema. I may need only a subset of your schema. I'm not saying it's always. Some places I might need your entire database. But some places I may need only parts of it, right? So I might have a separate API which is only getting me those parts. Or Shagun, if I'm not wrong, based on the payload, the same API can behave separately, right?
Yes.
Based on a different payload, it will give either 2 parameters or 1 parameter or 4 parameters. You can configure your API based on the payload.
Yes. Especially API we use for the filters. Like you said, if we want some different filters based on some queries, so we create a separate API that will give me only those data.
Either you create a separate API or the same API can behave differently based on the payload.
What is payload here?
Payload as an extra information which API is a query which API is a request which the front end is making the back end, right? So along with that API call, the front end also supplies some information which is useful to make that thing, right? For example, if I'm telling the backend to give me names of all people who applied for this job on Monday. So I give a payload, right, with the
Monday.
Date, Monday, and all of that. So that the backend uses that data to, pull out that information and supply it. So you may not want to create a separate API altogether. The same API, you can configure it in a way that if I get this payload, please give these 3. If I get this payload, please give these 2. You may want to write your API like, so-and-so API question mark and say type equal to 1 or type equal to 2, type equal to 3. If the type is 3, please give this. If the type is 2, give this, or type is 1, give this. You may want to design it in that way, right? Instead of, yeah.
either we can do same thing with the payload or the query parameters.
Yeah, if your intelligence is in the query parameter itself, you can say that if the query parameters are like this, please supply only these. Or if the query parameters alone are not able to supply that intelligence, you might want to add an extra variable called type. And in that variable called type, you might want to store what, if you say type 1 API, please send only name and age. Type 2 API, please send name, age, and email address. Type 4, please send name, age, email address, and phone number. Query parameters, as in when you run a query, you give in that you give the parameters information to run that query, right? Like you say that please get me all applications of Saurav to the company Apple in the year 2022. So these are the three parameters, right? Date, company, and the applicant. So when you do a query, right? Query means what? You're searching. So when you search, you have some information to search, right? Those are the query parameters. So based on the query parameters, you're searching.
But the payload and the query parameter is the same. So in the first case, the Monday was the parameter. The day was the parameter. Are they the same thing, payload and parameter?
Now, payload is what the API brings with, right? Payload is the information. Now, queries run. See, API is a request made by the front end. Correct? Now, your queries are done on the back end. Queries are, you execute queries on the database to get the information. Okay, Saurav, let me ask you one question. Are backend and database the same?
No, database
Backend is your server. The application which runs on your server, that's the backend. Database is where you're storing your information. Now your server is talking to your database. Now your server is trying to search some entries and give it to the database. That's a query. Your server is pulling out information from the database and saying, hey, these are all the relevant data that you need. Let's say Saurav goes and asks, give me all the salty products on Amazon. So Amazon server goes and runs a query on Amazon's database and finds out all the products which are salty and gives it to the server. The server then through the API gives it to the front end, and on the front end you can view all the salty products. Query runs on the server. The server executes a query on the database. API, the front end makes a request to the backend. So to run a query, you need the parameters, right? So those parameters, the front end supplies through the payload. And that payload information, the server can use it to execute a query on the database. So they are connected. It's like you are a customer, you're coming and giving me a payload. I'm the store. I'm calling my go down and I'm giving a query. Whatever information you're giving the payload, same thing I'll give it to the go down through a query.
Okay.
So can we say that when we are giving the information, that is called parameter, and when the information is with the API, it converts, like it is then called the payload.
Yeah, it's called payload because the API is giving extra information. See, you can just call an API through a URL, go to deepthought.education/this, that's it. But apart from the URL, it can carry extra information through a payload. See, let's say Saurav saw Deep Thought's ad on some website and you're sending him to the mobile app. You know his behavior on the advertising website. So you give that as payload information to the mobile app. So the mobile app will directly open what he needs and show him that only when he gets in. So through a payload, my front end is supplying information to the backend. Query is a different concept. Query is how I pull out whatever I want from database. Why do I need queries? My database has millions and billions of entries. From those millions and billions of entries, I want to pull out my entries very quickly.
So queries are run through APIs, right?
No. Queries are run by the, but not from the front end to back end. Queries, the back end runs it.
Okay, so front end requests something through the API. Then API gives that information to the backend. Then backend runs the query. and supplies that information back to the front end through the API.
API is a function which sits on the back end. API is a function which is defined on the server. The front end calls the function on the server. Now, inside the API, there are methods. That method executes this query. Or the API might call a separate method defined in the backend, and that method might have this query in it. Sounds good? Yeah. Okay, we're going a little more into backend. I appreciate the curiosity and happy to have a follow-up session on that. But right now I want to go back to my concept, which is writing data models, which is, I think, the core of today. So I think while writing a data models, one very important thing we can do is to I wouldn't say your data models, but schemas, right? So while writing the schemas, I'd want to understand what all queries might act on this database. List down that for this database, what all queries would come in. That automatically comes when you write your list of APIs only. Here you're writing your list of APIs, right? Or rather in your stage 2 only you would have written your list of APIs in the flows. So, but here you'll write in detail, right? What all APIs do you need? What does each API do? You write that down. So when you write your API itself, you get an understanding of what all queries are required. So then you think of how would I execute this query? How would I execute this query? To execute that query, I need those keys, right? Do I make sense? To execute the query, I need keys, right? So those keys have to exist in my schema, no? So why do we leave a TID, PID everywhere? Because those TID and PID become the keys for me to execute the query later on. Am I making sense? So here two concepts are becoming important. One concept is in stage 3 that you list in stage 3 that you list all the APIs that you require, what the APIs do. And while listing the APIs, you list what all queries might be required. And then you think of to execute these queries, what keys do I need? What all APIs do I need? What all queries do these APIs do? To execute those queries, what all keys do I need? Now, once you know what all keys do you need, can you go and check if those keys already exist inside that database? Inside that schema? Because to create that document, you need that schema. Did you understand the flow?
So these keys, like they can be any key, or they need to be the primary key or foreign key or something like that.
No, don't confuse with all that. Key as in
Can
query parameters. Yeah.
to take our earlier example of the expiry, there was no expiry in our we are right. There was no expiry, so that was missing on our query. That was not defined there, right? That's the key we want we want our API to call.
Correct. No, we want a query to use those fields. I run a query and say these fields. Please get me all the documents with these fields.
Okay. So what
So
I'm asking is like, yeah, yes.
The expiry date would be one of the key, right?
Yeah, for the query.
Yeah. So what I was asking is like these keys will be unique for every record, or they can they have duplicate values. They can have.
They can be unique for every record. Like the name, there can be one more person with the name Utkarsh Keshri.
Yeah.
So in some places you may want to store a unique ID for each person to distinguish.
Yeah, that's what I was asking about, because if there can be duplicate key values, then it will then
Exactly. So where do
Yeah.
you realize the need for a unique ID?
because while running a query, it can create confusion. Which Utkarsh are we talking about?
And also, again, I would say don't get too much into this. This is something which the architect has to, the senior backend developer has to look into this. Again, it's too much of an ask for a beginner to go into that level. because I'm sure somebody can learn this with time. I'm not saying 5 years, 10 years, I'm saying hardly 1 month. Once the person gets comfortable with this, right? So yeah, we list the APIs, we list the queries, and for that queries, what are the parameters or keys we use for that query, and we make sure that that's covered in a schema. That's one concept. Second concept is when we are designing our APIs, we might want to know what are the specific data models for each API. And my data model need not be entire schema. Like in the case of one of our backend developers, what I saw him do is he wrote the entire schema and went to our. The problem is in your data flows, right? Entire schema need not go all the time. It could be a lot more elegant if I'm only flowing that data which is required at each stage. So later on, you want to change your system, changing the system becomes easier. So Pooja, you spoke of systems breaking down from MVP to other, because if we don't bring in that robustness in the design, systems break down. So if I need only 3, I put only 3 in the data model, my API exchanges only that. But what if you make only one schema and you make only one API and the same API is used everywhere? So if I change this one fellow, I need to change that in 8 places. But instead, if I make each piece standalone and I have a very modular structure for how I do things, even if that one piece changes, all the other pieces are unaffected. Because in modular thinking, what do I know? This module has all these dependencies. I can make any change to this module as long as I don't break those dependencies. But when we do not have modular thinking, there's no structure, right? So you make one change, you have to think like what all things are changing. So that's again a different discussion on robustness. We'll have that discussion sometime later. But for now, all I would say is concept 1 was story for alignment, where we spoke of micro story and macro story. Concept 2 was scope for agility, where we spoke of writing the wireframes, the databases, and the flow between the screen to the database and screen to screen. Stage 3, what did we say? We take the wireframes and we expand it into a detailed mock-up with real values, not lorem ipsum values. Because when we put in real values, we get a visualization of what is going on. Okay. And as far as APIs are concerned, there we only wrote flows, but here we write what all APIs we might need, and in that APIs, what all methods we might need, what all queries we might be doing, and what variables would that query need to run that query. We write that down here. So we have APIs, we have screens, and we have the schemas, and we also have data models, because each API needs a data model. Why? The wireframe got expanded into a detailed mockup, right? And the databases got expanded into schemas. Databases got expanded into schemas, and those flows got expanded into APIs and data models. And in that API itself, you're trying to expand that into what all methods do I need inside the API. So now what happened? The specific accountables are established. You know what all you'd want to do, the complete logic, you've laid it out already. That is, to make my biryani, I need to cut my onions, I need to cut my carrots, I need to boil my rice, I need to, do all these things. Then I do this, then I do this. My entire recipe is designed first. Then when I go into the kitchen, I don't have to do too much of thinking. I just execute my recipe. Methods as in the functions inside the API. The API is made up of parts, right? Those parts are your methods.
So for instance, if if a user BMI is to be calculated, we have weight and height. The API will do the calculation and give the BMI.
There's a method which takes these two as an input and gives the BMI as an output.
Okay.
Some APIs can have a single method. Some APIs can have multiple methods depending on the complexity. Some APIs may not have multiple methods, but they might call methods which are written separately in our backend. Because when we know the same logic can be used in different places, we don't write it in the API. We write it in the server, in the backend application, we write it as a method and keep it. So whichever API needs it, it can call that method and use that method. So what does the wireframe expand into?
Data model, schemas,
Detailed mockup.
detailed mockup.
The wireframe was a screen, right? So now it becomes a detailed mockup. So from
Yeah,
a front-end perspective, you know all that you need.
That extended wireframe, right?
Yeah. And what does the database which you wrote in stage 2 expand into in stage 3? Schema.
Okay, schema.
Right? So that you can create the actual database. In stage 2, you just said I need a database for it, but you didn't talk of what all are there in the database. In stage 3, we are making a schema. And what do the flows expand into?
The APIs.
APIs and queries. APIs, the methods inside the APIs, the queries that may be the APIs and data models, the methods inside the APIs. And if there are some queries, what are the variables based on which the queries would be called? Wait, let me write it on the screen. So wireframe expanding is pretty simple, but the flows, right? I expand the flow into, okay, I need this API, and this API has this data model. This API works with all these data, and this API has this particular method in it. This API might do a certain query, and that query uses all these parameters. We've gone into this detail of description. Got it? So what has happened is, except the syntax, the complete logic of your backend is finished by now. You guys see how? See, Shagun, writing the individual method, is it tough? So the tougher part is this layout. Once you get this right, the actual software development is a piece of cake.
This is what being delayed on any development process. Development of any project or any product won't get delayed if this thing is clear.
And that's why we're meeting today, right? So Pooja and Shagun, I have some work for you tomorrow. I want you guys to make a Google Sheet format for this whole thing. Anirban already has a little format, right? His CPAS, I think he put it in this format. That stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. So that for any new project, people follow this format and go into this structuring before going into the project. Because if they learn this, so more than learning programming, learning this becomes important, right? Because once you learn this, you'll be able to build new products easily.
Yeah. Mohit, what we bring up yesterday, we discussed now that we are having a problem and we'll create a documentation for it for new developers.
Yeah, the pattern sheet kind of thing, right?
So can you
What
bring
sheet?
the idea?
A pattern sheet, like it's like a sheet where we have all the links related to the project and all the links related to the topics, like the documentations. So if someone works on like anything, if she working on fixing a bug or creating whole new thing or just fixing some tweaks, so whatever steps he or she follows, he or she documents it. So this is, it will be like a bet on sheet. So every time a team shuffles, so we just don't wait for explaining things. We can just pass on the link of this bet on sheet.
Makes
So
sense.
yeah, that kind of thing.
In fact, if you look at the old projects of Deep Thought in February and March of 2021, we used to have these sheets, Google Sheets, where the entire project is documented. So I think in the tech team, we have not been practicing it that well, but I think, yeah, it's a good one we need to do. I think, see, what we can do is this project management sheet itself, which we are making, can be the pattern sheet, where you can have one separate subsheet which contains an index to resources which may be useful.
Like for each project, the flow that is there, micro story, then macro story. So detailed description of each project would be there in a one sheet, so that whenever someone came into our project, we just give that sheet and they can understand front end, back end, and everything.
Basically all the Google Sheets pertaining to the project can have one index.
Yeah.
The narration of that index, so people can move from one sheet to another sheet. And I think when the PDGMS comes in, it becomes easier because all your resources are inside that project only. So worst case, you just run a query and say, show me all the assets with respect to this project.
Yes.
Right now, Google Sheets could be anywhere, but in the PDGMS, the sheets will come from the project context. So again, this is exactly why we want to index it everywhere, right? So now again, the schemas bit, you want to leave an index is of this project, is of this sub project, so that later when you run a query and say, show me all the sheets of this project, I can pull the sheets and show it to you quickly. Same concept, right?
Yes.
Show me all the Google Sheets of DT-thon. So today, how do? We go into Google Drive and search DT-thon, and then wherever that word called DT-thon is used, it gives us. Then we need to check which one is actually related to DT-thon, and we find it. But what if each Google Sheet was flagged? This is with respect to this project, with respect to this sub project. And what if we maintained data of which are the related projects which we may have to study, whether dependencies. So then when you ask me all the resources related to one project, it shows me all the documents of that project, and it shows me all the documents pertaining to related projects. So those documents can be useful to study the project. Again, this is an example of indexing. Okay. So,
I have a question.
Huh.
Yeah, so it is kind of a selfish question, but like, can we apply this project framework in other domains? Let's say in marketing or in like some other like sales. Can we apply this framework in other domains also?
Yeah, perhaps.
Like, how can we do that? If you could take an example.
No, whatever framework we just spoke, which framework? You mean this 4 steps?
Yeah, these 4 steps.
Yeah, so micro story, macro story remains the same in any field. Then your step 2 was your flows, right? So what are the pieces that you would need without going into details? Step 3 is, so I think stage 1 was micro story, macro story in terms of what you're trying to achieve. Stage 2 is you're trying to define the scope of your project. What do you want to do in your project? Stage 3 is you're writing your specific accountables that in each task which is in your scope, what are the specific plan, right? The specific recipes you're writing down. And stage 4 is when we come up with a staggered plan, that milestone 1, I do this, milestone 2, I do this, milestone 3, I do this, and so on. Yeah. I think we'll just make a Google sheet which has this structure where at each stage people write this down. Because by filling that Google sheet, people are performing all these steps in a simple and clear manner before going into actual coding, so that you look at the macro view and micro view and then go into the product. Because otherwise, if I tell it orally, people will nod their head, but people will not write the queries and the list of queries, list of parameters. So all this careful checking which I spoke of, people may not do that careful checking. They'll forget it. But if there's a Google sheet which asks you to fill it up, you don't forget it, you check it.
Sort of, we can create a sort of template.
It's a
We'll copy
checklist of
that.
sorts. Yeah, it's a checklist of sorts. The template becomes a checklist of sorts. Now, this sheet may not be used by other domains. In every domain, you may want to, the format may have to be tweaked, right? Because here this sheet talks of APIs, queries, and so on. In marketing, you may have a different structure. But the macro level structure remains the same, right? Story for alignment, a scope, then the specific accountables. And the last part is staggered approach. So the fourth part, staggered approach, is, let's say you're trying to build an application and it has to work for millions of applicants. So maybe in first step, you say, I don't write it for millions of applicants. I write the code for one applicant, only for one applicant and one employer. I make it work. Once I make it work for one applicant and one employer, then I expand that one applicant to a lot of applicants. I expand that one employer to a lot of employers. So I think for staggered approach, what we need is, we need to identify what are the various variables in my system. And how can I cut down those variables in my system initially and bring in those variables in later stages. Am I making sense? So again, we need a Google sheet for this, Shagun, where we write each stage, we write variables, and after every stage, new variables get added. So in stage 1, we can have a guideline that we probably don't look at more than 2 or 3 variables, which are changing the complexity. So that the stage 1, whatever project we design, we can complete it in just 3 days. It's so simple that executing it is easy. Then all we're doing is level by level, like layers of onion, we keep adding it on top of it.
And for data models, while observing in Hariharan's sessions, I came to know that some of the fields in the model are same for each and every project. Is active, TID, PID, hierarchical structure. So we can keep all those fields in a document so that any developers who are building data model can use it directly without thinking so much on that.
I wouldn't endorse this idea. Because I believe that data models, I would want the person to think about the data models and write them down. Because while thinking about the data model, I understand how the communication flow is happening between my client and the server. Are you blindly writing is active, or do you have a reason for why you're wanting to understand that information is the user active or not?
These are the key fields that backend developers forgot.
Exactly. So if the backend developer has forgotten that field, it means the backend developer has not thought about that communication flow properly, right?
Yes.
So are you going to address that problem by asking this person to copy paste from a source, or are you going to address that problem by telling the developer to think clearly and teach the developer how to think clearly of what all fields are required?
Yeah. So yeah, they need to think what they are going to do and communication flow between the data model.
Now, simple thing, right, Shagun? Let's say, is the user currently logged in or not is a data you want, right? Let's say, or is the user active, right? You want the data. Now, your backend developer has not included that in the data model, but you believe that the data is important. One thing is, somewhere your process flow diagram has to break. Why? He has not included this data. This data is not available to the API. Then how does the API do its job?
Yeah.
Then it either breaks because you're not able to execute what you wanted, or it makes your system less efficient. But if it makes your system less efficient in the MVP phase, that's okay. I mean, someone like Hariharan can always review and that can be changed later on. If it's only affecting robustness, once the MVP is done, we can slowly make it robust and change that thing. But if it is going to even affect the MVP itself, I think you'll know it when you write the process diagram. Okay, give me one field which people miss all the time.
One is status.
Status of what?
Status of project or status of any task. If they are bringing status, then
which data model do they miss the status? in the data model of a which API? Create API or read API?
Create API means initially while creating any
In
project.
create API, so which means they're missing it in the schema itself.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if they're missing it in the schema itself, then there would be some front-end API where they need the logic of whether the project is active or not.
Yeah, means from the front end, when we discussed, then we got, okay, I need a status, I need activeness of the project.
Shagun, listen patiently. What am I saying? Schema, mein the guy didn't take this information. Front end, mein one API demands, I want status. You wrote the flow diagram. What will you realize? I need to supply this information, but I don't have the information. Then what do? You go and modify your schema.
Yes.
See, right now the problem is coming in because Shagun, people were working in silos. They were not. Abhishek, I think I'll disagree with you. People, the big picture was not clear to people. Because if big picture was clear to me, I would know that the front end over there needs the status information. So I will know that my database has to hold this information to supply that to the front end. So then I write it in my schema because I know my database needs that. Then I also tell that the create API, which is going to get that from the front end into my into my database, has to carry this information. This is a classic case, like let's say I'm a product person and I don't know what the customer wants. Umang, let's say, is a salesperson. I'll make whatever product I want. Umang goes and talks to the customer, let's say to Mohit. Mohit says, strawberry flavor, I won't drink. I want only chocolate flavor. But Umang is only doing sales. He's like, I have this product. If you want, you take. If not, you get lost. I'm a product person. I'm like, no, I'm making the world's best strawberry shake. Everyone in the world will drink it. But what if the big picture was clear? Then I talk to Umang and I ask, hey, how's the market reacting to this? So I design a product which is of interest to the market. And Umang also realizes that he can drive that feedback to the product, so the product can fine-tune the product, which makes it, product team can fine-tune the product, which makes it easier for him to sell. Or if he sees that one particular product, people are liking it more. This product, people are liking it more. He sees that and he explains it to me. I build on that feature. So this is what happens when we see the bird's eye view, right? How product and sales interact with each other. Product, sales, marketing. So in that sense, how front end, back end, all of them are interacting with each other. That picture, if it's clear in stage 2. In stage 3, when we're adding the details, it becomes easier for us to understand what our schema is. So Shagun, if I got you correctly, your problem is not with data model, your problem is with schema.
Yes.
Because your create API's data model will be same as schema, no? In most cases. Because it's a document database, you have the flexibility not to create all the records. Am I right?
Yes.
Your schema might have 8 records, but I might have the flexibility to write only 4 records and say other 4 not. Again, depends on your design of the API. You might say, hey, I've got 8 records, 4 are optional. Your middlewares change accordingly to validate the create API.
Yes.
So in some cases, your schema is same as the create API's data model. Some cases it is not the same if some of the fields are optional. So in my opinion, Shagun, this problem gets solved if stage 2 to stage 3 flow is smooth. Because if you are missing a field, somewhere you have to be hurt, no? कि front end वो demand कर रहा है, दे नहीं पा रहा हूं, या front end दे रही है, store नहीं कर पा रहा हूं.
Yeah.
So can you do a dry run? What do you mean by dry run? You ask, okay, that is my front end. It's giving me this data. Where is it going? This is my back end. Where is this data coming from? This is my API. What data does it take? What data does it give? Where does it go? Can you see all the flows like a story? Once you can see all the flows like a story, then this problem doesn't even arise. Do you guys remember when I was doing the CPaaS project? Almost like 45 minutes, I was like, From here, it will go here. From here, it will go there. Okay, for this, what do I need? How will you run the query? What will be the things for the query? And to be honest, at that time, I did not even know how MongoDB queries are written. I asked Shavan, how does it work? Because I was thinking you have to manually write an algorithm which will go through a table, find out everything and tell. That's the beauty of using a document database, right? You don't have to figure out how to do it, right? The database already has methods which will help you do that. See, why do we work with different kinds of databases? Because the databases already have smarter queries written with them. So if I want to pull out something from the database, I don't have to break my head on how to pull it out. The creator of the database only gives me the methods which I can use to pull it out. Am I making sense? And there are various kinds of databases which are available. Based on the use case, we opt for one or more database. Like you're having a lot of network methods, maybe you'll go for a graph database. So right now you guys must be aware of SQL database and non-SQL database. It's document database and SQL database. But apart from that, there's so many kinds of databases. So that again, when we write queries, we don't have to break our head in terms of how we write the queries. Because a person who's created the database only gives us all the queries, right? While studying the database itself, we learn what all queries are there. And when we have a query to be written, we just use one of the database queries and execute it. So these 3 steps, if they're done well, and step 4, which is staggered approach, where we write down variable wise. Stage 1, I have only 3 variables. Stage 4, these variables. Stage 5, these variables. So stage 1, I don't make it for a list of users. I make it only for one user. I don't make it for too many employers. I make it only for one employer. One user, one employer, they're able to use my application. Done. Stage 2, I increase it. So that way, when you go step by step, it's very easy to build the project. Any experienced developer will tell you they would have taken 3-4 years just to learn this. How to go from simple level of complexity to slightly higher level of complexity. Yeah, questions?
When earlier in the example, when we said that, okay, we want to know if a person is an extrovert or not. Okay, so we'll ask the psychologist. Psychologist will tell us 10 things, and psychologist tell us, see, if the person does 6 or 7 out of these 10 things, the person is an extrovert, right? Where does the developer write this? Like where does the developer does this calculation?
This comes from your product researcher, right? So your product researcher gives you this brief. So as a developer, I know that this has to sit inside, this data has to sit inside some database. So this data has to go into some schema. So then I ask which database would store this information. Is it the user database? Right? So in my schema of the user database, I put this information. Then I ask, how do I get this data? Do I derive this data, or does the user give me this data? So then I know that if I derive this data, basis what do I derive this data? Then I need a method to derive the data. What are the inputs which I need to derive this data? Means to see if the person is active. I will look at how many posts the person is posting on the platform and then say this person is active. You understand the difference between primary data and derived data? Primary data, the system is someone is already giving it to you. Derived data, you make use of the primary data and you derive it from the primary data. Am I making sense? You ask yourself a question, is it primary data or is it derived data? If it is derived data, then you ask, what is the primary data? Do I need to derive this data? And where do I get that primary data from? So you know, okay, it's coming from the screen. Then when that primary data comes from that screen, which method would I use to convert that primary data into derived data? Then you ask, okay, which API is going to take this, which API is going to take this data and go write it to a database. If you have to cut this entire long story short, it is this. You write that entire flow and you go from end to end. This screen, the user clicks this button, this API runs, this API calls this method does this, it gets this output, that API returns back this thing to the front end, then front end does this, it goes from this screen to this screen, then this happens. You run through that entire logic of what happens. Once you run through that entire logic of what happens, if there are any roadblocks somewhere, you get to realize that.
And all this is algorithm, right?
Yeah, you can say it's a combination of front and back end algorithms.
Yeah, and a researcher, a psychologist, or sociologist is gonna give this theory that I said. So there was some controversy that some algorithms are racist. Is this the reason?
We're just talking of, if I have already committed to one algorithm, how do I create software?
No, but like
Don't
it
take
just
it on
connected.
don't take it on a horrible tangent now. Don't take it on a horrible tangent now. The scope of this workshop is, I have an SRS document. I know what I want to build. How do I build that? That if it is a racist algorithm, how do I build it? Not racist algorithm, how do I build it? What algorithm do I design? That's a product research problem. Don't bring that right now. Have some maturity, Saurav. What are we discussing right now? So, Saurav, are we here to just talk and suffer from tomorrow, or learn how to execute? There's a practical problem which Shagun and Pooja have realized. What is that practical problem? Sometimes the product researcher is very clear in terms of what to build. But because we have a young team, many of them are doing software development for the first time, they're getting stuck and we're giving a solution. And here you are trying to take it into sociology, ethics and all of that. That's a different discussion, no? That discussion you will bring it when you're doing a product research discussion. Here it is all about how do I execute? It's pure project management. It's not product management. It's pure project management. I know what I want to build. How do I build it? Am I making sense? Because see, Saurav, you will go, you will talk to Shagun, you will quote Karl Marx, you will quote so many people and go away. They are the ones who have to suffer, no, to write the code. Going and singing Karl Marx is much easier than actually write, step by step, especially for a beginner. Shagun, would you want to convey what kind of nightmares you people have when these guys come, give presentations and go away? Saurav, most of the product people log off at 9 o'clock. Some of the software people, many times they are up on the link till 10 o'clock. Do you realize why? There's a lot of problem in terms of that ambiguity which comes because of our innovation. That ambiguity has to be resolved by the developer because computer doesn't accept ambiguity. Because in reality, some of our TPMs are not being TPMs. That is why we made you an FPM. Because that ambiguity has to be resolved by the TPM. So if you were attending this session with a TPM focus, our entire focus has to be on, if I have clarity of what I want to build, how do I solve all these teething problems and go build it? Because me writing pages and pages of blogs of I want my product to do this, I want my product to do this, is not enough. I need my developers to have the capability to produce a high quality application which is largely bug free, which works. DT-Thon, the first draft was full of bugs because the code was not properly structured. That's when we came up with this, and then we're thinking in terms of how do we structure the code properly, how do we be more organized in terms of how we plan our code, so that whatever intention we have in terms of philosophy, that intention we realize it properly. Your algorithm is flawed, the product researcher has to give you a proper algorithm. Me as a developer might add a bit to that algorithm, but primarily I depend on the product researcher or that data scientist to give me that algorithm. Do I make sense? Because see, Saurav, it can be very interesting to go on that discussion, but that's only going to deviate today's discussion, right? That way at the end, yeah. What?
Like when I first time read it, like I had this thought that how can algorithm given by computer, how it can be racist. So it connected this way. Not the algorithm is written by someone. that I understood today. So that's from where the question came. That if
Yeah,
it is to confirm
one
it.
writes the algorithm, how does it come? I mean, someone has to write it somewhere, right?
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's why I got that excited about it. Got to it for first time.
If you want to understand this better, stop hand waving. Go talk to Pooja or Shagun or Mohit or any of the developers here. See their code and see how code really works. Instead of just speculating, see how code really works. Like I got a sense of backend by seeing Shavan's code and seeing how backend really works. Front end, I think I'm a little familiar because I've been doing HTML, CSS for a while. So I kind of understand how front end looks. That's okay. But backend, I never saw it. So I think I looked at Shavan's code and that gave me a sense of how all this works. Okay, people, let's come back from the digression. Let's understand the takeaways of today. What do we do in step 1?
Alignment. We have to
How do
make
we achieve the alignment? Yeah, I did.
I was saying big picture and
Big picture and also a story with real characters to visualize. Micro story, macro story. So we try to go after alignment in stage 1. Stage 2.
we have agility. The scope of
Scope. We
agility.
define the scope of the MVP, right? The current project we're doing. What's the scope? So in that scope, what are the 3 things we are defining? The screens, then the schemas for the database. No, not schemas. Schemas come in stage 3. Only the database names. I need this database. I need this database. I need this screen. Again, we're not adding details into the screen. I need these screens. I need this database and flow diagrams. In the flow diagrams, what are the 2 kinds of flows here?
Data flow and UX flow.
UX flow is screen to screen flow. And data flow is database to screen flow, both ways. Screen to database, database to screen. Okay, this is stage 2. Stage 3, specific accountables. Specific accountables. Accountables as in each one I can allocate it to people. So in specific accountables, what happens to my wireframe? It becomes a extended wireframe or a detailed mockup. What happens to the database name? It becomes a database name becomes a
Database, structured database.
it becomes a schema. Right? You write a schema of what all you need, right? Then once the database name becomes a schema, then the API names, the flow diagrams, there you'll have API names, right? What do the API names become? The methods inside the API, the queries inside the API, and in the query you write what all parameters are passed for the query.
Yes.
So for each one, you see the input, you see the output, and if it's doing its job properly. And at the end, what do you realize? My start and end, are they fine? You get what I mean? You look at, am I able to start? Am I getting what I want? And each chain, its in and out, are they neat? This method needs this input. Is it going to get it? Oh, that already, that database has it, it will borrow. Or that method is going to give this input, it will borrow. And this has to give an output. Does it know enough to give an output? Okay, it knows this to give that output. So through these 3 stages, we've written the complete logic of our application. Now, while implementing the logic can be implemented at various levels of complexity. So we go to stage 4 staggered approach where we say, hey, initially I'll do it only for one user and one company, so that I have less complexity to deal with. Because when you have only one variable or 2 variables to deal with, you put your entire energy only on those variables, so you'll be able to get that execution right. Once you get the basic execution right, you have the confidence that adding other variables becomes easier. That's why staggered approach becomes important. And Saurabh, please don't take me, otherwise I have to cut you, because I wanted the complete focus only on the execution part. That I have an idea, I've already thought through, my philosophical debates have already ended on the idea. I want to execute it quickly. How to execute it quickly is the focus of today's workshop. Okay. So now I'd like to go back and ask a question. My objectives or the promise or the expectation which I set at the beginning is without a senior developer coming in and spoon feeding everywhere, a beginner would be able to go and do the task properly. So does this meet that expectation? How? I want reflections on that so that we all understand how all our learnings are connected to our objective. How does this equip a beginner to function autonomously to a large extent after the initial briefing is done by the senior?
So by doing this, the number of times we go for doubts to the senior level person will get decrease, because most of the things will get solved internally between the backend persons and front end person.
How?
So as they will discuss, like if it's a backend person, so if he creates some data models or a basic schema of the database, so he will present that. Then the front end person will present whatever he visualized, and then they can have a like one time a backend presented his thing, and then the front end. Now they both will get like one turn to explain what are the things that were missing at one end and what was present in the one end. Like if some requirement came from front end and back end realized, okay, this I don't have, right? Some requirement from the front end part was there and back end realized I don't have this thing to give you. So he writes it down, and then the same thing can be happened in the vice versa. So by doing this, I think things can be optimized.
And how does a product person come in? How does front end and back end are coordinating, but how does a product person ensure that they're not missing anything?
Yeah. So product person, the first briefing will be done by the product person, right?
Correct. The story.
Then
Product person
the story.
the story and the wireframes.
Yeah. So, product person can make sure that while this whole process is going on, the story doesn't get lost in between.
Exactly. And mostly the product person will only, if it's not a TPM, they'll only be able to understand the front end.
Yeah.
The test of whether the product person is a TPM is if that guy can understand the backend. Because then the TPM can get into the, so TPM being in the dry run is very important. In fact, if the person is a true TPM, I won't let you continue with your project until you do the dry run.
We can keep the TPMs as the moderator of that session.
If it's a true TPM, some of our TPMs are still learning to be a TPM.
Yeah.
Like Anirban and Harshvardhan, I think can play the TPM to some extent. So I think hopefully once the TPMs go through this recording, they can do the dry runs. But I think TPM training has to be in, we'd want all our TPMs to be trained on several dry runs. So now what I'm thinking is, I'll conduct 5 dry runs this week, record all of them, and they become syllabus for TPM training. Got it? So the TPMs listen to so many dry runs, they understand how to do proper dry runs, and they go to every team and help every team with a dry run. And I would suggest that with Mr. Hariharan also, you guys do dry runs. So we'll and what we do in the dry run is that when you do a dry run with me, let's say, I would just note my remarks and put it aside, but I wouldn't tell you then and there. At first, let you finish your dry run. But wherever I see problems in your dry run, I note it and keep them. In the question session, I bring them up. Because what is happening sometimes the dry runs is they're going too long. Because in a dry, ideally, I do not want my dry run to be a discussion. I want my dry run to be an audit alone. You get what I'm saying? Like I give you only 5 minutes for your dry run. And in that 5 minutes, you take me through your entire flow diagram and only stage 2, stage 3. 5 minutes. Before I come to dry run, I read stage 1 and come. I read stage 1 and come to dry run. So I'm mentally prepared. In dry run, in 5 minutes, you take me through stage 2, stage 3. Where every flow, I check it carefully to see if there's something missing. That's it. I'm not sure if match the column thing can be used because there could be a lot of chaotic flows, right? From the same place, some like a hub and spoke model. Things are moving here and there. Yeah. So, but I think if all our people learn how to do this dry runs properly and learn how to do this 4 steps properly, we're doing fine. But before going into execution, I think stage 4 has to be analyzed very, very carefully so we don't boil the ocean. That we reduce, the senior in the team reduces as many variables as possible. But as Shagun pointed out today, if we can do all these 4 stages, I think 50% of the project is done. Because the actual writing of methods or the HTML, CSS doesn't take much time.
You can ask this to Mohit. Mohit, now in how many days you can create a social scorecard? Everything is clear to you. You are reading a social scorecard.
Yeah, so like now it won't take like the whole
3
week.
days? 3 days.
Yeah,
I told
2-3
you
days.
3 days.
Yeah, there's nothing much in it.
3 days.
Yeah, I think it can be done in
Do
like
now
2
in
days.
3 days.
Okay,
Front end, back end.
Now I'd like to ask you guys a different question. Do you realize why a product company software developer is very different from a service company software developer? Because a product company software developer has to go through all this grind. The real work is in arriving at this, not in actual coding. What does a service company software developer do? So many of these keep coming, the guy blindly codes. The team lead does all of this diligence, but in a product company, the team lead can't be doing diligence because you're perfecting the product, right? You do so many iterations. You want the developer itself to do some of the diligence. I'm glad we ran into this problem because I think we arrived at a very good training module, right? So now going forward for all the product companies that we help, we can train all the beginners. So suddenly product companies will see that, okay, interns can contribute to products. When interns are trained on, this methodology. More reflections, we'll listen to 3 reflections and close. Mohit has put in his reflection. More reflections.
So when the presentation is like given by a senior developer, usually there are so many things which are on our plate that we tend to get confused. So we don't have that proper structure to put in. Henceforth, we miss out on things, and when there is a time to add on things, we mess up structure more and complicate things more. So with this 4-stage model, we will have a clear structure and also story alignment. We are going to get help of product people. We will get things right through them, and then also align, like as you said, scope and understanding the scope of the particular project, and then specific accountabilities. These are the small things that we never looked at, but then these are so important that I realized today.
Okay, can you go over those small things again? List.
Small things meaning the screen and DB names, like you mentioned initially, just in scope, just understand what all screens are there, then understand the DB names, that is sorry, database name, and then try to connect them. Later, in specific accountability, go into schema, then how we go into APIs. These small things we were missing out, and now these things are crystal clear.
That's what Hariharan meant when he said, write your code without going into details, just with the headings. This is kind of your code without the details. Yeah. Thank you, Pooja. That was a beautiful reflection. Who's going next?
For TBIMs, I just want to bring one data flow. If they can understand this, they'll get. It's not about understanding. So in this flow, everything is written, which database is there, which API would be called on which screen, what are the details that we can bring in. So if this kind of flow we can generate for each project, so it would be easier to get into any project.
I wouldn't do this, Shagun, and I'll tell you why. This is not intuitive to me. In fact, I don't need this. Once, whatever I'm telling you right now in this workshop, if you can do it, where you define the names, and because see, this is basically a fully expanded view. I am asking you to do a nested view.
Okay.
Where I just write the main blocks and I write the flow, and inside each block, I write the details of what all is coming in.
Okay, so I have one doubt. Isn't it would come in second stage where we have to create a flow?
Correct. So second stage flow will be similar to what you wrote, but may not be as detailed as what you wrote.
Okay.
See, Shaguna, in my life, I believe one thing. I would never write something which I can't visualize in my brain in one shot.
Yeah.
At any point in one screen, I never write something which I can't visualize in one shot. If I can't visualize it in one shot, I nest it and put it in subscreens. Because what happens when you have such a large screen, you don't get an intuitive hold of it. So it gives you a feel-good factor that you're writing all that, but in reality with execution, it doesn't help. Because by the time I come to the second part of your screen, I forget the first part of your screen. And I get scared of looking at that screen. Why? It's too bulky, too big. And to get used to that map, it'll take easily 45 days.
Yeah.
Correct? But what if your map was smaller? You'll get used to it in 2 days.
This is how we could create a flow. This is one of the intuition that is being cleared here. Instead of making everything bulky, we can create it in a chunks, and those chunks would be separate out so that we can work on a particular chunks.
Modular thinking.
Yeah.
Modular thinking in your flowchart.
Not modular thinking in a code. We'll bring modular thinking in a flowchart itself.
Modular thinking is a philosophy. It is not just coding. It's a philosophy of how you do anything.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Shagun, for the reflection. Who's going next? One last reflection we'll hear for today.
I have a very short reflection. Like when you understand all those steps, when you understand all the structure, like how do we can approach a project. When a product person or a senior gives you a brief, your questions would be more focused. Question would be more direct, targeted at like what do we need here, right? So that can be a possibility.
Yeah, see, definitely you can ask more questions which expand the scope, but I think asking focused questions will help you understand your project and also get whatever you need to streamline it and execute it quickly. Because I think, see, a deep thought will generate a lot of very interesting ideas. But if we can improve our execution process itself in terms of how our beginners work, we'll be able to execute a lot more ideas, we'll be able to build a lot more interesting products. Because thinking of a product is not enough. You have to be able to deliver a bug-free, quality code wala product. Quality code matters because when it scales, right, things start collapsing if that quality isn't there. But Pooja, I would say that as long as this nesting of flows, right, your flows are all well nested, more often than not, you might produce something which is robust, which doesn't break that easy. But when you have such a large chart, right, which is not nested, things are likely to break. Because I can't visualize that modularity is not there. That's why one project which I have in mind, which I've been trying to ask Shravan to do, we'll hopefully have a meet and try to pull out that project is, every application, I do not want a backend file to have more than 200 lines. Front end as well, if we can achieve not more than 300, 400 or something. And whatever is repeating, we make it like a widget or make it like a method written somewhere and borrow it from libraries of widgets and methods. And when your libraries also, can you make sure that a library doesn't have more than 400, 500 lines or even 200 and nest that library itself in folders. You might say I have so many folders, so many files, that's okay. More folders and more files is okay. But what is not okay is when one particular file is too long, 400, 500 lines of code. Same thing, right? The flowchart is too big, can't visualize it, can't act on it. But when each file is short, I can visualize it, I can modify it, I can do something with it. It's intuitive to me. So one thing is to work on the folder structure itself. One thing is to work on the folder structure itself. Another thing is to make an encyclopedia of folder structure. This folder gives you this folder gives you this at multiple levels of nesting. Do you understand what I'm saying? My main folders are these 5. Folder 1 has this, folder 2 has this, folder 3 has this. So I know my navigation of where to go and look for whatever function I want. So if we can cut down the length of each file, clean up our code, and make a navigation library for our folder structure, I think new people will be able to take over our projects very easily. It's basically building very high quality documentation. So 2 things I think I want to conclude today's session with 2 things. One is I would want all the TPMs to learn this technological concepts to be able to do the dry runs and go into that level of thinking. 2 is I think I want all the developers to learn, not developers, but all the team leads to learn concepts of design thinking. Because once you guys learn the concepts of design thinking, the way you represent and organize your code, you'll change it. And when you change the way you represent and organize your code, it's more intuitive. And what happens when it's more intuitive? Your speed increases. If the water bottle is on my table, I drink more water. The water bottle is in the next room, less water. So in the same way, when your representation is intuitive, your workflow gets smoother, you work faster. If your representation is intuitive. So that is why nesting is very important, because when I nest it, I'm not overwhelmed. I don't have to see too many things at once. Do I make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
So I hope you guys, Abhishek, so does this help finally?
Yeah. I think I come from more ideas for next week.
Awesome. Looking forward to your ideas, Abhishek. Have a
Yeah.
great week ahead, all of you.